Hello, DLI Cohort 1. This is an example of a counterbalance sequence for the 5672 class, and it is due on Friday at midnight. In this presentation, you will see in slide 1 the name, context, theme, standards, and grammar or linguistic feature that is problematic. Slide 2, a noticing activity with color or font enhancements of the problematic grammatical feature. In this case, it is the superlative adjective, and this should not be enhancement of vocabulary unless it's within a repetitive linguistic structure that's problematic for students. Slide 3 is the text outlining what you will say as a teacher to students to draw attention to the feature. Slide 4, awareness. What questions do you ask the students so they can discover the rule? Slide 5, a brief grammar explanation with a visual. Slide 6, and 6A and 6B, two controlled practice activities which provide the student with the correct answer. And slide 7 is an open-ended practice activity that can produce many correct answers. Here's slide 1. The theme is the solar system, and the problematic linguistic feature is the superlative adjective. The original lesson was created by Joy Morgan, Midian Perez, and Jorge Quiroga, but I did adapt this for this assignment and for this screencast. The context is immersion, Spanish immersion originally, grade 3 or 4, although the presentation is in English. The subject is science, and one of the standards is Common Core 3.E11. Here you'll see a noticing activity with a rich text. This text has a repetitive language feature, the superlative adjective. On day 2, students will look at other forms of the comparative, but in this day, we're going to focus in on the superlative adjective. Notice the color and font enhancements, which will draw the student's attention. And remember, this is not a vocabulary focus, but a grammatical feature focus that shows up repeatedly in a text. In slide 3, you'll see the conversation I have with the students to draw attention to the specific feature. Okay, students, read this text with me, paying a special attention to the pink text. The closest, the greatest, the farthest. What stands out about those words? What do they have in common? Closest, greatest, farthest. So what little words do you see in these big words? Closest, farthest, greatest. What little words do you see? Yes, close, great, far. And how many planets is Mercury being compared to when we say that it's the closest to the sun? Yes, all of the planets. So of all the planets, Mercury is the closest to the sun. This is called the superlative. Okay, superlative. What small word is part of that big word? Superlative. Yes, super. What other words begin with super? Superwoman, Superman, superheroes. Yes. Similar to superheroes, superlatives express the highest quality or degree of something. In slide 4, we ask students to work in groups or maybe individually to discover the rule. How do we form superlatives? So what we'll do is we'll ask them maybe on a slide of a PowerPoint or on the smartboard or on a piece of paper to have them look at the paragraph again. And we ask them to talk about the following questions. How do we turn close, great, and far into the superlative? With what ending? How is this sentence different? Saturn is gassy. Of all the planets, it's the gassiest. The why and the students will be thinking about this or talking about this, the Y changes to an I. And we'll ask them to infer the rule. So what can you infer about adjectives ending in Y when turned into a superlative? And hopefully together in groups or on their own, they'll come to the conclusion that the Y changes to an I prior to adding the EST. Rocky, it is the rockiest of all. Pretty, she's the prettiest of all, with that Y changing to an I. Then briefly, for those, there are a lot of students who need the explicit grammar rule, that no matter how much implicit teaching and input they hear, the feature used within your conversation through oral input or through written input, they're not going to get the rule. So it's important just to briefly, not spend an hour on this, not even spend 5 minutes of it, but I would say 30 seconds to a minute, obviously depending on their grade level, to just review the rule. So in this case, I found this slide online. So that superlative adjective is used to compare 3 or more things. And what we're looking at in this example from this rich text are one-syllable adjectives. The adjective plus EST, biggest, smallest, nicest, tallest, etc. But we also looked at one of the spelling changes that happens with adjectives that end with Y, such as easy, busy, pretty, heavy, where the I changes to I. Y changes to I plus EST. Now, in a later date, and perhaps with another text, I would actually talk a little bit more about these other irregulars, or maybe not irregulars, but adjectives with 2 or more syllables, where we don't add EST, but use most instead. The most beautiful, the most dangerous. And of course the irregulars. Good doesn't become goodest, but the best. Bad doesn't become baddest, but the worst. But again, spend no more than 30 seconds to a minute on the explicit grammar rule. Some will just drink it up, hear it once, and get it, and apply it in their output, but most will need this to be revisited several times again. Now in slide 6, we're moving into controlled practice. Now it's important to create activities where the students are receiving direct feedback so they'll know whether the answer is correct. In this case, we have a gap activity. Now what I would do is put these 2 activities on the front and back, student A on the front, student B on the back of a photocopy. And the directions are as follows. Listen to the questions, respond out loud. Your partner confirms the right answer. So student A listens to the questions. Now, the questions for student B are below the line at the bottom of the green slide. Which planet is closer to the sun, Mercury or Mars? We're looking up here at student A. Student A needs to fill in the blank based on his or her information that she has or he has in the text. Mercury is closest to the sun. B is going to look at his or her answer. Ah, yes, Mercury is the closest. B asks, what's special about its size? A fills in the blank. It is the second smallest right after Pluto with only 4,878 kilometers at the equator. B looks at his or her answer. It is this, yes, it is the second smallest. Then it's A turn to ask the question. Which planet is bigger, Jupiter or Saturn? B responds based on the text that had been previously read. Jupiter is the biggest planet in our solar system. What can you say about the orbital speed? The orbital speed of this giant planet is not the fastest of all, because this speed depends on how far a planet is from the sun and not on how big or small it is. The answer is not the fastest. That's correct. So it's very important in these controlled practice activities to have the answer on the activity itself so students are receiving that direct feedback. I also want you to pay attention to their learning of content. Remember, we're balancing content learning and language learning, going from content learning, shifting focus to language learning, and now going back to content learning. Here's another controlled practice activity, again, where there's one correct answer. So divide the students into groups of 3. Each has a different planet card. Now, as you can see, this is a made-up planet, which I'll talk about later. One person in the group is the writer and has the pen. One is the runner, but does not have the pen. The goal is to share orally their information from their cards in order to best fill in the answers. So what students will do is look at the blanks here, then talk about the information on their card in order to fill in the blank with the correct superlative. Now I chunked these out into 3 groups. Group 1, Group 2, Group 3, and Group 4. After this group believes they have the correct answers for Group 1, they're going to run up to the green sheet with the green answers. Actually, the runner will, the designated runner, or maybe you could have 2. And they'll look at the answers, and if they have all of the correct answers, they'll grab a little green sticker and put it on their sheet. If they don't have the correct answers, they'll run back to their group and they'll share with the group what the right answers are. They'll then move into Group 2, talking about their information on each of the different cards. They'll fill in the correct superlative. The runner will run to the pink sheet, check the answers, grab a pink star if they're correct. If they're not correct, work with or memorize or work with another runner partner. Now that I'm talking about this, it might be good to have 2 partners because then they're able to work together to remember the right answer. Run back to their group, ask their writer to fill in the rest of their sheet with the correct answers. Move on to Group 3, so on and so forth. The last activity is not a controlled practice activity. It's an open-ended practice activity where there are many correct answers. And in this case, the students create their own planet. They'll create their own planet individually, in pairs or in small groups, based on the categories of the real planets. Then they'll create a little gallery walk where students will share their planet, and they're asked to use 3 superlative adjectives in their share. As their classmates walk around with their little sheet of paper, or it could be, I suppose, on their iPads, a little planet card template, they listen to their partners talk about their created planet and write 2 sentences with the superlative adjective. They turn this into their teacher as a formative learning check. That is my example of a screencast counterbalance sequence. If you have any questions about this, be sure to reference back to the language focus instruction website, Moodle site, where there is a PowerPoint outlining the counterbalance instructional approach that might give you a little bit further detail. I hope this is helpful for you, and that I very much look forward to seeing your work. And just remember, we're practicing, so don't feel you need to be perfect here, folks. It's time-consuming, and we really want you to fall in love with curriculum design. So try to have a little fun with it too. Remember, practice, not perfect. Okay, bye-bye.